Imagine your GPS uh, intentionally routes you into this totally unmarked, super dangerous desert.
Oh, man. Yeah, that sounds awful.
Right. It just makes you wander around. You are exhausted. You are feeling, completely vulnerable and totally
I
lost.
would be so frustrated.
And then when you are basically at the end of your rope, the GPS uses this random stranger walking by to point you directly toward a group of people who are actively waiting to jump you.
Wow.
Yeah. If a piece of technology did that to you, well, you would throw it out the window.
Oh, absolutely.
You would assume it was broken or worse, that it was actively malicious.
You would never trust that device ever again. I mean, it goes
Yeah.
against every single assumption we have about guidance.
Yeah, we expect guidance to mean safety.
Right. We assume that if we are being led, we are being led away from the ambush, not right into it.
But what if that terrifying detour, that horrible routing, was the only possible way to save the known world from starvation?
That changes the whole picture.
It does. What if the ambush waiting for you was the precise mechanism required to preserve the lives of millions of people, including, the very people who attacked you?
That is a staggering thought.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into Genesis chapter 37, specifically looking at verses 12 through 17.
It is a fascinating passage.
It really is. And I bring up that GPS scenario right off the bat because, well, you have to ask yourself, when looking at this text, how often do we assume that if we just obey God, he is going to hand us a smooth road?
It is basically the default assumption for most of us.
Yeah.
We have been conditioned by modern assumptions and, especially that prosperity gospel mindset to think obedience always equals immediate physical safety.
Right. Or financial security.
Yeah, financial security, relational harmony. We think, I did the right thing, therefore God owes me a blue sky day.
Which is such a carnal delusion when you really look at the scripture. And this specific passage, it shatters that assumption entirely.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, if you are just doing your daily Bible reading, these 6 verses look incredibly boring.
Yeah, like the most boring travelogue ever written.
Right. It just looks like a quick scene about a young man named Joseph looking for his brothers.
Just wandering around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most people just speed read right past it to get to the action.
To the pit.
Yes, the part where he is thrown into the pit.
Which is a shame, because if you skip the travelogue, you miss the hidden providence of God operating underneath the surface.
You miss the theological stakes.
Yeah, so I am going to ask you to hold me accountable today because I know I have a tendency to want to skip to the end of the story.
I will do my best to keep us on track.
Awesome. Because our goal for this deep dive is to unpack how ordinary duties, simple tasks and quiet submission lead directly into God's sovereign plan.
And we are going to see that true obedience can lead directly into hardship.
Not because God has abandoned you.
Right. Not because he left you or because he is punishing you, but because he is orchestrating this massive, unseen purpose.
The tension here is astronomical. We have a favored, beloved son leaving the safety of his father's presence.
Acting on a direct command.
Yeah, acting on a command and walking straight into a situation of severe, life-threatening vulnerability.
But before we can even analyze the physical steps Joseph takes, we really have to establish the historical backdrop.
The geography.
Yes, the geographical setting is vital here. If we do not grasp the danger of the terrain, well, we miss the massive cost of this obedience.
Okay, let us set the stage then. We're looking at the geographical and historical powder keg that Joseph is walking into.
It is a total powder keg.
We're situated in the patriarchal period, roughly the 2nd millennium BC, and the family of Jacob, also known as Israel, is living in the land of Canaan.
Right. They are essentially a semi-nomadic nation dwelling within another nation.
Surrounded by locals.
Yeah, they're trying to remain distinct in their covenantal practices, while surrounded by Canaanite, Perizzite, and Amorite populations.
And the promises of God, a land, an innumerable seed, a blessing to the nations, those are funneled right through this very specific, incredibly flawed family line.
Flawed is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
This family is an absolute mess.
And the physical locations mentioned in the text really highlight the fracture in the family. The text tells us the brothers are tending the flock up north in a place called Shechem.
While Jacob and Joseph are down south.
Right, in the valley of Hebron.
And Hebron functions as the patriarchal headquarters. It is a place of relative safety.
It has history.
Tons of history. It is rich with covenant history. It is where Abraham and Isaac walked.
So being in Hebron represents the security of the father's oversight.
Yes. But the older brothers, They have taken the flocks way up north to Shechem,
Let us put this into perspective for a modern audience. The trek from Hebron to Shechem is roughly 50 miles.
which is huge.
Yeah, today, 50 miles is, what, an hour on the highway with the air conditioning running while you are listening to an audiobook?
If the traffic is good.
Right. But in the ancient Near East, a 50-mile expedition meant something entirely different.
It was a massive, exhausting undertaking. We are talking about a multi-day expedition through extremely rugged, semi-arid terrain in the Judean hills.
Just rocks and dust.
Yes, and you were exposed to the scorching sun during the day and then plunging temperatures at night.
Not to mention the animals.
Exactly. You are completely vulnerable to the wild predators that roamed the countryside back then. Lions, bears, wolves.
But the elements and the animals were not even the primary threat.
No, not at all. The primary threat was hostile locals and bandits.
And that brings us to the specific location, Shechem. Because Shechem is not just a random dot on the map.
Not for this family.
No. There is a terrifying, bloody history tied to this precise location in the family's very recent past.
We have to look at Genesis chapter 34 to understand why Jacob is so anxious here.
Yes, the context of Genesis 34 is absolute mandatory. So Shechem was the site of the Dinah incident.
A dark chapter.
Very dark. Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land, and she was defiled by a local prince.
A man named Shechem, the son of Hamor.
Right. The town is basically named after him. And in response to this violation, two of Joseph's older brothers, Simeon and Levi, decided to enact a brutal revenge scheme.
And it was not just a quick skirmish in an alleyway. It was premeditated, weaponized religion.
That is a striking way to phrase it, weaponized religion.
It really was. Hamor and Shechem came and wanted to make a treaty and intermarry with Jacob's family. And Simeon and Levi told them, well, we can only do this if every male in your city is circumcised.
So they used the sign of the covenant as a tactical weapon.
They did. The men of Shechem agreed, and on the third day, when the men of the city were feverish and completely incapacitated from the procedure, Simeon and Levi took their swords, walked right into the city, and slaughtered every single male.
It is horrifying. They turned Shechem into a literal killing field.
They executed an entire populace, and then they took the women and children captive and plundered all their wealth and flocks.
It was an act of completely disproportionate, ruthless revenge.
It was. And I remember Jacob's reaction to this in Genesis 34.
He is not happy.
No, he does not congratulate them. He is terrified. He tells Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household."
So Jacob lived in absolute terror that the Canaanites would form a coalition, march down, and just wipe the chosen family off the face of the earth.
Yes. So when we hear the word Shechem in chapter 37, we should feel a chill run down our spine.
It is a place of trauma?
Trauma, judgment, and intense, lingering hostility.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm grasping the gravity of this. Jacob is sending his 17-year-old son, Joseph, completely alone to Shechem.
Alone.
Is this akin to, say, sending a lone, unarmed diplomat into an active combat zone where his family's name is universally despised?
It is close to a diplomat, but honestly, it is worse.
Worse.
Yeah, because a diplomat usually has institutional immunity and, a heavily armed escort.
Fair point.
Joseph had zero protection. And worse, he had a literal target on his back. He was the favored son of the man whose older sons just committed a massacre.
Yeah.
He was not just an emissary, he was walking prey. The local populace in that region likely harbored a deep-seated desire for blood vengeance against the house of Israel.
If they realized who he was, it was over.
If any of the surrounding tribes realized who Joseph was, they would have killed him on sight just to settle the score.
And the brothers were up there 50 miles away from any paternal oversight, completely isolated in this hostile territory.
Very isolated.
When you factor in the physical distance, the brutal history of the location, and the political tension of being a minority group in Canaan, you begin to realize the sheer gravity of Jacob's anxiety.
He's not just being a helicopter parent.
No, he is not hovering over his kids for no reason. He has legitimate, terrifying reasons to worry about his sons.
Which is why the instruction Jacob gives to Joseph feels incredibly heavy.
Right. We move from the dangerous geography right into the command itself in verses 13 and 14.
And here's where the narrative irony gets really thick. Look at verse 13. The text says, "And Israel said to Joseph."
Wait, Israel, not Jacob.
Yes. Now, the narrator could have just used the name Jacob. He has been using Jacob interchangeably. but he specifically uses the name Israel right here.
That is a brilliant textual observation.
The use of Israel signals that Jacob is acting as the covenant head of the patriarchal family.
He is putting on his official hat.
Right, he is not just speaking as an anxious father, he is giving an official authoritative commission. In this ancient structure, a son was not just an heir who sat around waiting for his inheritance.
He functioned as an authoritative emissary.
Spot on. He is the eyes and ears of the patriarch. Joseph is carrying the delegated authority of Israel.
So what does he tell him?
Jacob tells him to go and see if it is well with his brothers and roll with the flock and to bring word back.
I want to look at that phrase, see if is well. The underlying Hebrew word used here is fascinating. It is shalom.
Yes, shalom. And we often translate it simply as peace in English, which, makes us think of an absence of conflict.
We think of sitting by a quiet lake.
Right, just quietness. But the biblical concept of shalom is vast.
It covers everything.
It means welfare, soundness, wholeness, completeness, economic stability, physical health.
So Jacob wants to know about the total shalom of his sons.
Yes. Are they safe from the Canaanites? Are they behaving themselves? Is the flock secure from predators? This is a mission of pure benevolent concern.
But the irony is devastating. If we rewind just a few verses back to Genesis 37, verse 4, the text explicitly tells us that the brothers hated Joseph.
They hated him.
They hated him so much that they could not speak shalom to him.
They could not speak peaceably to him at all.
The contrast is staggering, isn't it? The father sends the beloved son on an errand to seek the shalom of men who have fundamentally rejected his shalom.
They have declared an internal war against him.
Yeah. Joseph is sent in the service of grace and care, but those brothers are brewing malice and murder.
Which raises a massive question.
I have to push back on Jacob here.
Go ahead.
Did Jacob know the danger of the brothers' hatred? I mean, he lives in the same camp. He sees the glares at dinner.
He has to see the tension.
Right. And he gave Joseph the coat of many colors, which basically poured gasoline on the fire of their resentment.
True.
Plus, he knows about the provocative dreams Joseph had, where the brothers' sheaves of grain bowed down to Joseph's sheaf. Is Jacob completely blind to send his favorite unprotected son into this volatile mix?
That is the classic question of this text. It highlights the massive gap between Jacob's knowledge as a character in the narrative and our knowledge as the omniscient reader.
So let us defend Jacob slightly.
Yeah, Jacob views this through a practical, paternal lens. He sees family friction. He sees sibling rivalry, which, honestly, he himself experienced with his brother Esau.
Good point. He is used to brothers fighting.
But he likely does not grasp the lethal, murderous level of the brothers' envy.
So you are saying Jacob sees a campfire, but we see a powder keg?
Precisely. Remember, Jacob's primary fear is the Canaanites. His anxiety is focused outward.
He is looking at external threats.
Yes. He is terrified that the locals in Shechem have attacked his sons. It simply does not compute in his mind that his own sons would turn into predators and attack their own flesh and blood.
It is unthinkable to him.
Unthinkable. So Jacob gives a command with one intention, a loving check-in, while we, the readers, understand that this command is carrying Joseph straight toward an execution.
It builds immense, agonizing suspense.
It really does.
We are watching this 17-year-old step out onto a road of peace, fully aware that violence is waiting for him, and that forces us to look at Joseph's response.
What does a son do when handed this terrifying assignment?
Jacob says he is sending him, and Joseph replies with one single word in Hebrew, Hineni, here I am.
Hinei is one of the most weighty discourse markers in all of biblical Hebrew.
It is so much more than just a location check.
It is not a statement of physical location at all. If someone called your name in a crowded room, you might say, "I'm over here by the window." That is not what Hineni means.
What does it imply?
It implies total readiness. It conveys existential availability and absolute submission to a rightful authority.
It is like a military blank check handed to a commander.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
The soldier does not ask about the odds. They do not request a review of the terrain.
They do not demand to see the casualty reports before they commit.
Right. They simply step forward, state their availability, and wait for the marching orders to be spoken.
That military analogy captures the spirit flawlessly. Notice what is absent in Joseph's response. There is absolutely zero negotiation.
No bargaining.
He does not point out the obvious dangers. He does not say, "Dad, remember last week when Simeon glared at me with murder in his eyes?"
Or, "Dad, Shechem is 50 miles away, the terrain is brutal, and the Canaanites want to slaughter our family."
Exactly. His obedience is simple, direct, and completely unembellished.
And this posture of Hineni stands in such stark contrast to our modern cultural preferences.
We do not like that word today.
Not at all. Today, we prize autonomy above almost everything else. We prize self-direction.
If a family dynamic is difficult, the modern therapeutic advice is almost always permanent estrangement.
Cut them out, protect your own peace.
Right. Establish boundaries and never cross them. Do not engage with hostile people.
Now, obviously, we are not talking about staying in physically abusive situations.
No, of course not.
But Joseph models something entirely foreign to our 21st century mindset. He embraces a covenantal duty that requires him to actively pursue the welfare of the very people who despise him.
It is a radical subordination of personal comfort to the will of the Father.
It takes so much maturity.
It does. And if we pull back and look at the broader redemptive picture in Genesis, Joseph's Hineni echoes the submissive stance of his great-grandfather Abraham.
You mean in Genesis 22?
Yes. In Genesis 22, when God calls Abraham to the horrifying, incomprehensible task of sacrificing his promised son, Isaac, Abraham's immediate response is that exact same word, Hineni. Here I am.
That gives me chills.
By using this specific word, the author is establishing a massive theological link between Joseph's expedition and the sacrificial obedience required within the covenant.
It forces us to completely rethink our assumptions about obedience.
Because as we talked about at the beginning, we often think that if we obey God, he will reward us with a smooth, trouble-free path.
A sunny day.
Yes. But here, the text locks obedience and suffering together in the exact same room.
This is a vital theological correction for anyone listening who feels like they're suffering because they did something wrong.
Sometimes that is true. We do reap what we sow.
Sure. But here, Joseph is not walking into affliction because he rebelled. He's not suffering because he took a wrong turn or because he was arrogant or because he sinned against his father.
He enters hardship precisely through the door of faithful, meticulous submission.
The hard road is not always the wrong road.
That's a great way to put it. God's servant is often led into extreme difficulty while walking in absolute faithfulness.
That brings us to the actual expedition. Joseph says Hineni, he packs his supplies, he leaves the safety of Hebron, and he heads north.
Yeah, he walks the 50 miles.
But things do not go as planned. He arrives at Shechem, the place he was told to go, and the brothers are nowhere to be found.
The pasture is empty.
The text describes him wandering in the fields.
The Hebrew word used here is ta.
Ta.
That implies straying, staggering, or being completely lost and disoriented.
Let us pause on that word ta. I think everyone listening has experienced that feeling on a spiritual level.
I know I have.
You did the right thing, you followed the instructions, you walked the hard miles.
You did the work.
Yeah, you reached the destination you thought God pointed you toward, and the objective is missing.
The job falls through.
The relationship ends.
The church splits.
You are left standing in an empty field, completely vulnerable, wondering, did I mishear God? Did I take a wrong turn?
From a purely human perspective, Joseph's mission at this exact moment looks like a colossal failure.
He is completely exposed in a hostile region, wandering aimlessly.
But then, the text says a certain man finds him.
Just an unnamed guy in a field.
Yes. This part always fascinated me. The text just calls him an ish, a man. He asks Joseph what he's looking for.
And Joseph says, I am seeking my brothers, which, by the way, shows incredible resolve.
He maintains his mission despite the massive confusion.
He does not say, I am going home. I tried, Dad.
Right. The man then tells him, oh, I heard them say they are going to Dothan.
So Joseph changes his route, heads further north, and follows them to Dothan.
We have to analyze this interaction carefully because a casual reader might see this as just a fortunate coincidence.
A lucky break.
Yeah, good thing that guy was walking by, or Joseph would have never found them.
I have to push back here because this is where a lot of people struggle with biblical narratives.
Okay, let's hear it.
If God is writing this story, and God is sovereign over all things, and God knows exactly where the brothers are, why include the delay?
Why the wandering?
Yes. Why make Joseph walk all the way to Shechem, get lost, look foolish, feel vulnerable, and then have to rely on a random stranger for directions?
Why did God not just tell Jacob to send him to Dothan in the first place?
Exactly. Is Moses just including historical trivia to pad the word count?
No, it is far from trivia.
Yeah.
This scene is a masterclass in the doctrine of providence operating through secondary causes.
Secondary causes. Let's unpack that.
This is a massive concept. God is the primary cause of all things. He ordains whatsoever comes to pass.
He is in total control.
But, and this is crucial, He does not usually operate by dropping miracles out of the sky.
He uses the ordinary.
Yes, he uses ordinary everyday events, human choices, and natural laws. We call those secondary causes.
So God uses the ordinary to accomplish the extraordinary.
Undeniably. This encounter in the field is not luck. It is not a chance meeting.
That certain man is an instrument of God's meticulous orchestration.
But notice, the man is not a robot.
He has his own plans for the day.
He is walking in the field for his own reasons. Maybe he is checking his own crops. Maybe he is traveling between towns. He acts entirely out of his own free will.
And Joseph is wandering out of his own free will.
Yet God's primary causality arches over the entire situation perfectly, bringing these two men to the exact same square foot of earth at the exact right time so that information can be passed.
It is mind-bending when you really think about the logistics. The timing had to be down to the second.
It shatters the idea of fatalism.
Because fatalism says, whatever will be, so do not bother trying.
Right. But biblical providence says God is in control of the ends, and he is equally in control of the means.
The wandering has a profound purpose.
It provides emotional realism for the believer.
That is so comforting.
You can be walking in perfect obedience, doing precisely what you believe God has commanded, and still feel entirely uncertain about your next step.
You can feel lost in the field.
But God uses this very uncertainty, this frustrating delay, to redirect Joseph to the exact location where the betrayal must happen.
Dothan. Why is Dothan so significant?
Had Joseph found his brothers in Shechem, the story would have unfolded entirely differently.
Really? How so?
Shechem was isolated in the hills, but Dothan was situated further north, nestled along major international trade routes.
Like ancient highways.
Specifically the Via Maris, which connected Mesopotamia all the way down to Egypt.
Oh, wow. So the geography dictates the outcome.
That is right. Because they are in Dothan, the Midianite and Ishmaelite trading caravans conveniently pass by a few days later.
And if they are in Shechem?
If they're in Shechem, there are no traders. If there are no traders, Joseph is just killed and left in a pit to rot.
The brothers would have just murdered him.
Yes. And if he dies in a pit, he never goes to Egypt.
If he never goes to Egypt, he never interprets Pharaoh's dreams.
If he never interprets the dreams, no grain is stored.
If no grain is stored, the entire known world, including the covenant family of Jacob, starves to death in the famine.
The promise of Abraham fails. The lineage of the Messiah is wiped out.
That is heavy. You are saying the salvation of the world hinges on a teenager getting lost and asking a stranger for directions?
Every single detail. The 50-mile walk, the delay in Shechem, the agonizing wandering, the unnamed man, the redirection to Dothan. Every microscopic detail is actively moving the narrative toward the divine design.
This means God's guidance does not always look like a straight, unbroken line.
Often it does not.
It looks like a detour. It looks like a frustrating delay. The interruption is actually the appointed route.
The GPS going blank is part of the programming.
What looks like a missed connection to us is perfect timing to God.
He governs the perplexing, messy, anxiety-inducing moments just as much as he governs the moments of absolute clarity.
So this brings us to the theological climax of the text. We have to look at what this ancient family drama points toward in the broader scope of Scripture.
Because this is not just an isolated historical story about a dysfunctional Bronze Age family.
Right. There is a redemptive pattern here. We are looking at the motif of the sent son.
If we step back and look at the whole of biblical revelation, from Genesis to Revelation, we see this pattern clearly established over and over.
What is the pattern?
The beloved favored son leaves the safety, joy, and fellowship of the Father's side. He goes out into a hostile world, to hostile brethren, to seek their welfare, to seek their shalom.
And instead of receiving him with gratitude, they reject him, envy him, and plot his destruction. Now, I know there are listeners thinking, are we pushing this too far?
It is a fair question.
How do we avoid artificially forcing later New Testament theology into an ancient Hebrew text? I hear this, and part of me wonders, does the text itself demand that we look forward to Jesus?
Or are we just doing clever allegorical gymnastics, reading our own ideas backward into Genesis?
Right. It is a valid, necessary caution.
We should never flatten historical texts into mere symbols or find hidden Bible codes where none exist. We reject arbitrary allegorizing.
We are not trying to find secret meanings in the number of sheep.
No, not at all. However, we are recognizing a deliberate, redemptive historical pattern that the New Testament writers themselves explicitly pick up and apply.
Typology.
Yes, in Reformed theology, we call this typology. Joseph is a type, or a historical shadow, anticipating the ultimate reality of the incarnation.
The outline of the shadow matches the reality of the object casting it.
Precisely. Let us look at the specific points of contact. Look at Joseph's active, willing obedience.
He's an enemy.
He leaves the father. He goes into danger. He seeks the lost brothers who hate him.
This is a faint, historical, but very real, anticipatory echo of Christ's perfect, sinless obedience.
Jesus, the eternally beloved Son, was sent by the Father, not to do his own will, but the will of him who sent him.
He left the glory of heaven.
He set his face like flint toward Jerusalem, knowing full well the cross awaited him.
And the brothers' reaction, their absolute refusal to speak peaceably, their plotting. That mirrors us, does it not?
It holds up a devastating, terrifying mirror to human enmity toward God.
It is hard to look at.
The brothers' murderous envy shows us the default setting of the human heart. The natural man does not welcome the authority or the shalom of God's appointed king.
We see the coat, we see the authority, and we say, we will not have this man rule over us.
In the prologue of John's Gospel, it says, "He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him."
The brothers stripped Joseph of his robe and threw him into a pit, leaving him for dead while they sat down to eat a meal.
Humanity stripped Jesus of his garments, nailed him to a tree, and mocked him while he bled out.
The parallels are undeniable.
But here is the magnificent sovereign turn of the gospel. Christ is the greater Joseph.
He bridges the chasm of our rebellion.
In God's unsearchable wisdom, the very descent, rejection, and suffering of the sent Son becomes the ordained mechanism for the exaltation and salvation of many.
God uses the very sin of the brothers to save the brothers.
That is the crux of the entire narrative.
It is amazing.
Joseph's suffering eventually placed him on the throne of Egypt, allowing him to save his murderous family from famine.
And Christ's substitutionary suffering, his descent into the pit of death, secures eternal redemption for his people.
The evil intent of men, both in Genesis and at Calvary, is overruled by the sovereign grace of God to accomplish salvation.
As Joseph will say later in Genesis 50, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good.
That is a staggering truth.
It takes a quiet 6-verse travelogue about a kid walking 50 miles and turns it into a mirror of the gospel itself.
It changes everything.
So what does this all mean for you and me right now? How do we take these historical realities, these massive theological doctrines of providence and typology, and apply them directly to our lives today?
We have two primary diagnostic points to consider for application.
Let us break them down.
The first one deals with the mirror of the brothers. We have to confront the potential for secret envy and bitterness in our own hearts.
That is tough.
It is incredibly easy to read Genesis 37 and judge Simeon, Levi, and the rest of them as monsters.
We think we would never do that.
But we have to ask ourselves, do you harbor a spirit of destruction or resentment toward those who seem to be favored by God?
Wow. That is an intensely uncomfortable question.
It should be.
When someone else gets the promotion at work, or, their family thrives while yours struggles with sickness, or they receive recognition in the community.
Or their ministry explodes while yours stagnates.
Yeah. Do you celebrate their shalom, or do you silently wish for their demotion?
Do you rejoice with those who rejoice, or do you start cataloging their flaws to justify your resentment?
The brothers could not speak peaceably because envy had rotted their hearts.
Proverbs says envy makes the bones rot.
It starts small.
It starts with an eye roll. It moves to a refusal to speak well of the person, and eventually it turns into character assassination, if not literal violence.
This text is a stark warning against letting bitterness take root in the soil of your heart.
But the second diagnostic point offers immense comfort.
I think we need some comfort after that.
It is comfort for the wandering believer. When you feel like Joseph in Shechem, lost, confused, redirected by circumstances entirely beyond your control.
Feeling like your strict obedience has just landed you in an empty, dangerous field.
Yes. You must remember that there are no random tragedies in the economy of God.
The text insists that the same God who orchestrated the unnamed man in the field is orchestrating your detours.
He governs the diagnosis.
He governs the job lot.
He governs the delayed flight.
Your uncertainty does not mean God is uncertain.
I am going to push back here because it's so easy for us to sit in a studio with microphones and say, trust God, when we are reading a completed history book.
That is a very fair point.
We know Joseph becomes the second most powerful man in Egypt. We know he gets a chariot and a signet ring.
We know how the story ends.
But how does a person practically maintain that Hineni mindset, that here I am, readiness, while they are currently stuck in the proverbial field?
When they are feeling totally lost, frightened, and maybe even abandoned.
When the GPS is completely blank.
It is the hardest thing in the Christian life. We maintain that posture not by looking at our circumstances, trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind every inconvenience.
And we certainly do not maintain it by looking at our own ability to wander correctly.
No, we maintain it by looking away from ourselves and looking directly at the greater Joseph.
Looking at Christ.
Yes. Our obedience is not about trying to be the hero of our own story, hoping God rewards us with a promotion.
It is a grateful response to the one who already took the wrath we deserved.
We do not look to Joseph as a mere mascot for moral self-improvement.
We do not say, be brave like Joseph.
We look to the absolute sovereignty of the God who ruled over every microscopic detail of Joseph's life, knowing that he is the exact same God ruling over our lives today.
If he can use an unnamed stranger walking through a pasture to guide Joseph to Dothan, setting off a chain of events that fulfills a redemptive plan for the ancient world,
He can certainly manage the detours, the delays, and the disappointments of our lives.
we rest in his absolute sovereignty.
He is the master of the field, and he's the master of the wandering.
Let us bring this all together. Today we unpacked how ordinary fidelity and quiet, unflashy obedience place you right in the center of God's unseen, meticulous providence.
We saw Joseph step out of the safety of Hebron, answer his father with a resolute Hanini, cross the dangerous, rugged terrain to Shechem, wander in the terrifying unknown, and get redirected to Dothan.
And through it all, the hidden hand of God was arranging every single footstep, every single breath, to accomplish salvation.
It shows us that our duty is to obey the revealed will of God, to love him and love our neighbor, and to leave the hidden decrees of God, the complex routing of our lives, in his entirely capable hands.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Think back to that GPS metaphor we started with.
When you face your next unexpected detour, or a frustrating delay that ruins your perfectly calculated timeline, consider that you might not be off track at all.
What if the very interruption you are complaining about today is the exact man in the field pointing you toward the truest purpose God has planned for your life?
Keep trusting the mapmaker, even when the screen goes blank.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.